Hey, my name is James, the non-professional, back with another episode of Draw, and today we're doing Witchblade. Now, we're in the roughs, so as I said before, keep your pencils loose, throw a bunch of lines on the page, and just have a little fun with it. The thing that I wanted to focus on particularly in this episode is the roughs, because I wanted to talk about simple shapes. It's important that you understand that you just got to keep shapes simple. You're not trying to make anything spectacular at this point. You're just trying to get the concept on the page so that when you actually see where you're going or what you're going to be doing, you have a little bit more confidence just moving forward. Now in this character drawing, you notice that her upper body is faced one way and her lower body is faced the other way. And in order for me to do that, I had to create oblong shapes in her midsection in her upper body in order for it to be pointing one way and actually see that. And then, of course, her legs, her cylinder, the cylinders that I created for her legs and the ovals that I created for her legs is actually pointing in the other direction. Same thing with the arm there. You notice that her arm is going back out into the horizon behind her. And what you're going to do is you would create a cylinder for the bicep and the upper arm, and then you would create another cylinder for the lower arm. But if it's going out into the distance, then you're actually going to have one cylinder in front of the other cylinder, and both of them are sort of going to be tapering off into the distance. And then, of course, you're going to connect the little hand at the end. You know, when I was young, I used to follow artists like Todd McFarlane and Greg Capullo and Jim Lee and the rest of the Image crew, the elites of comic book art in the 90s. But when Michael Turner hit the scene with Witchblade, I was amazed at how gorgeous a female comic book character can actually look. And I just wanted to imitate that. I'm not even close to that. I agree, because I got these sketchbooks that I bought off of Amazon of all of Michael Turner's stuff, and it's honestly second to none. Is he the greatest comic book artist ever? I say he's the greatest figure drawer ever. But as far as storytelling and being able to put panels together and understand the composition of what should be shown on a page, Greg Capullo takes that one. And he's a pretty excellent figure drawer as well. So if you want artists that you want to follow, those are some good ones to start off with, at least with Michael Turner and his figures, and of course Greg Capullo and his storytelling ability. But right now we're in lines, so keep your pencils tight. And as I said, I've never been paid to do any of this, so just take what I have to say with a grain of salt. Now, metal on Witchblade was difficult for me. There was a lot of trial and error, but I found that open lines work best. If you don't know what open lines are, basically they're lines that have a sort of little white space in between them. You're drawing like sections, pretty much. And what I did was I took those lines and I made them, those open lines, and I made them jagged, and I had them follow the contours of her anatomy. Speaking of anatomy, that's something that I wanted to discuss with you guys too. It's important to learn anatomy. And my suggestion is get one of those 3D anatomy apps on your iOS device or your Android device. Those things are like $10 or sometimes like $5, just depending on which one you get. And make sure you get the ones that sort of do this 360 turn, that you can actually position the figure in, figure out how the arms connect to the upper body and how the pelvic girdle connects to the legs, and how the elbows move, or how the forearms move, and how the bicep sort of contracts and stretches out when the arm is moving. Because I get that comic books aren't supposed to be realistic, they're an embellishment on the human form. But in order for you to make that embellishment believable and not just outright ridiculous, you need to know anatomy. Now, just like with Spider-Man's webbing in a previous video, I used the metal here to sort of create more three-dimensional look on the character itself. If you notice her legs and the metal that's sort of wrapped around her legs, it sort of originates around the the crotch area, and then it sort of spans out, and then it sort of curves around the leg so that her leg looks a little bit more three-dimensional. I take advantage of any detail that I can use to make characters look more 3D. Of course, we have that arm going out into the distance and the metal on her face. When you're drawing Witchblade, don't forget the metal on her face. I'm not saying that is a hard and fast rule, but man, metal going across her face looks way more intimidating. So now we're in inks. Keep your lines super tight. Make sure that the color artist that comes after you knows exactly what you want. And remember what I said about shading in the previous video, or making things with form, with dimension. Try to find the details, use the details to actually create that cylindrical shape or that three-dimensional shape. One thing I found interesting about her metal, one thing that makes it look interesting, is the caterpillar-like sections that I draw throughout all the metal. And I just basically take the metal and I just recreate her anatomy and just let the metal and the open lines follow the contours of her muscles and her bust line, and that's basically how I encompass her body with metal. Now I decided to put clothes on her because one of the strange things that I found about the Witchblade comic was that the symbiote metal, the metal that was alive, I guess, sort of at times would rip off her clothes entirely, and I'm just like, that doesn't make sense to me, you know, unless you've got some sort of pervy metal, I don't know. But I've seen pictures, and don't get me wrong, they're phenomenal looking pictures, but they would be pictures of her and she would be completely naked and she would have just this sort of sharded metal bikini on. And I'm like, why did the metal tear off all her clothes? That's weird. I went ahead and put a tank top on her, some jeans. And as you can see, that the metal around her legs, it's actually creating an illusion of curve or dimension. And I love doing that. Rips in jeans are a lot harder than you think to draw. Those are jeans, by the way. All right, so this here is called the blackout technique. So basically you draw everything in black and you take an eraser or a white pen and you draw hatching. Now it's the opposite of how you regularly hatch, because in the lighter areas you would have more frequent white lines, and in the darker areas you'd have less frequent light lines. All right, remember, patience, persistence, perseverance. That's how you mature in any endeavor.